For 45 years, Michael Jordan carried the pain of his English teacher's words, "You'll never make it in the real world. Stop dreaming." Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield had crushed his teenage dreams in front of the entire class, calling his essay about becoming a professional basketball player unrealistic. Now, at 60 years old and worth over $1 billion, the greatest basketball player who ever lived was finally returning to face the woman who had doubted him. What he discovered in that empty classroom would shock him more than any championship he'd ever won, because sometimes the people who hurt us the most are actually trying to save us. And sometimes the cruelest words come from the deepest love. This is the story of a confrontation 45 years in the making, and the stunning truth that changed everything both of them thought they knew about their past. The black Mercedes rolled slowly down Market Street in Wilmington, North Carolina. Behind the wheel sat a man who needed no introduction. At 60 years old, Michael Jordan still carried himself like the champion he had always been. His hands gripped the steering wheel as he looked out at the familiar sights of his childhood home. September sunshine painted the small houses and corner stores in golden light. Children rode bikes on the sidewalks. Old men sat on porches, talking and laughing. This was the world that made Michael Jordan before the world knew his name. Michael pulled over at a red light and smiled. There was Murphy's Corner Store right where it had always been. How many times had he run there as a kid to buy penny candy with coins he found in the couch? How many times had he walked past this very spot, bouncing a basketball and dreaming of greatness? A young boy crossed the street in front of his car. The kid wore a Bulls jersey with the number 23, Michael's number. The boy had no idea that his hero was sitting just 10 feet away. Michael chuckled and drove on. The GPS on his dashboard said he was 5 minutes from Emsley A. Laney High School, 5 minutes from the place where his dreams had almost died before they began, 5 minutes from facing a ghost from his past. Michael reached into his jacket pocket and felt the folded letter there. He had been carrying it for 3 days now, ever since he decided to make this trip. The letter was old and worn from being folded and unfolded so many times over the years. He had written it in 1991, right after winning his first NBA championship. It was full of anger and hurt and words he had never been brave enough to say out loud. The letter was addressed to Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield, his old English teacher, the woman who had crushed his dreams when he was just 15 years old, the woman who had told him he would never amount to anything. Michael turned onto Gordon Road, where his childhood home still stood. The house looked smaller now, like everything does when you return as an adult. The basketball hoop his father had put up was gone, but Michael could still see the exact spot where it used to hang. He could still hear the sound of the ball bouncing on the concrete driveway. Thump, thump, thump. Hour after hour, day after day, year after year. That driveway was where he had cried the night Mrs. Whitfield embarrassed him in front of the whole class. That driveway was where his mother had found him and told him that sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the best things. His mother had been right about a lot of things, but Michael still wondered if she had been right about that. A car honked behind him. Michael realized he had been sitting still in the middle of the road, lost in memories. He waved and drove on toward the school. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from his assistant. "Media is already there. Principal says about 200 people waiting. Are you ready for this?" Michael typed back, "As ready as I'll ever be." But was he really ready? He had faced down the best basketball players in the world. He had won championships in front of millions of people. He had given speeches to presidents and kings. So why did the thought of seeing one old English teacher make his stomach feel like it was full of butterflies? Maybe because some wounds never fully heal. Maybe because the words that hurt us as children stay with us forever, no matter how successful we become. Maybe because Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player who ever lived, was still that 15-year-old boy inside, trying to prove he was good enough. The school came into view. Laney High School looked exactly the same as it had in 1978. Red brick walls, tall windows, and the gym where Michael had learned to fly. A crowd of people stood outside the main entrance. Students, teachers, parents, and reporters. They were all there to see him, to celebrate the dedication of the new basketball court that would bear his name. Michael parked and sat in his car for a moment. Through the windshield, he could see faces pressed against the school windows. Kids who had been born long after he retired from basketball. Kids who knew his story from YouTube videos and highlight reels. Kids who had no idea that their hero had once sat in these same classrooms, struggling to read and fighting back tears. He looked at the crowd again, searching for one particular face. An old woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. A woman who would be 81 years old now, if she was still alive. A woman who had shaped his life in ways she probably never knew. Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield. Was she out there somewhere in that crowd? Would she even come to see him after all these years? Did she remember the boy she had crushed, or had he been just another student among thousands? Michael took the letter out of his pocket one more time. The paper was soft from age and handling. He unfolded it carefully and read the first few lines. He had written 32 years ago. Dear Mrs. Whitfield, you probably don't remember me, but I remember you. I remember every word you said to me. I remember how you made me feel. He folded the letter again and put it back in his pocket. Today, he would finally find out if Mrs. Whitfield remembered him too. Today, he would finally get the chance to say the words he had been carrying in his heart for 45 years. Michael Jordan, 6-time NBA champion, 5-time MVP, and the man they called his Airness, took a deep breath and opened his car door. The crowd erupted in cheers as he stepped out. Cameras flashed. People called his name. Children pushed forward for autographs. But Michael's eyes kept scanning the faces, looking for the one person who mattered most. The teacher who had told him he would never make it. The teacher who had been wrong about almost everything, except for one thing she could never have known. Her harsh words had planted a seed of determination that would grow into greatness. The comeback king had returned home. Now it was time to settle the score. October 1978. 45 years earlier, the worn basketball bounced against the garage door with a steady rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. 15-year-old Michael Jordan caught it on the return, spun around an imaginary defender, and shot at the rusty hoop his father had mounted above the door. Swish. And Jordan scores again. Michael whispered to himself, raising his arms like he had just won a championship. In his mind, thousands of fans were cheering. In reality, it was just another Tuesday afternoon on Gordon Road. The front door opened, and his mother, Dolores, stepped onto the porch. She wore her cleaning uniform from the house she worked at across town. Her face was tired, but she smiled when she saw her son. "How long you been out here, baby?" she asked. "Since I got home from school," Michael said, still dribbling. "About 2 hours." 2 hours. Dolores shook her head. "What about your homework?" Michael's face fell. "I'll do it later, Mama. I promise." "You better. Your daddy and I don't work this hard so you can fail school." She watched him shoot another basket. "Though I got to admit, you're getting pretty good at that." Michael beamed. His mother didn't give compliments often, especially about basketball. She wanted him to focus on his studies, get good grades, maybe go to college. Basketball was just a game to her. But to Michael, it was everything. The sun was setting when his father, James, came home from the factory. His work clothes were dirty, and his hands were rough from handling machinery all day. But he always had time to shoot a few baskets with his son. "Show me that move you've been working on," James said, loosening his tie. Michael dribbled between his legs, spun around, and made a fadeaway shot. James whistled low. "Where'd you learn that?" "Been watching the Lakers on TV. Magic Johnson does it all the time." James smiled. His son had big dreams, maybe too big. But there was something special about the way Michael played. Something that reminded James of his own dreams from long ago. "Come on inside," James said. "Your mama's got dinner ready." At the kitchen table, Michael pushed his food around his plate. His mind was somewhere else, thinking about the essay he had to write for English class. Mrs. Whitfield had assigned them to write about their future goals. Most kids would write about being doctors or teachers or working in an office. But Michael knew exactly what he wanted to write about. "What's got you so quiet?" Dolores asked. "Got this essay to write," Michael said. "About what I want to be when I grow up." "That's easy," his younger sister Rosalind said. "You want to play basketball forever." "It's not that simple," Michael said, but his sister was right. That's exactly what he wanted to write about. After dinner, Michael sat at his desk in the bedroom he shared with his older brother Larry. The blank paper stared at him. Writing was hard for Michael. The letters seemed to jump around on the page sometimes. Reading was even harder. But he had something important to say, so he picked up his pencil and began to write. "My Future Goals" by Michael Jordan, he wrote at the top. Then he stopped. How could he explain what he felt when he held a basketball? How could he put into words the fire that burned inside him every time he stepped onto a court? How could he make Mrs. Whitfield understand that this wasn't just a silly dream? He thought about the NBA players he watched on television. They were like heroes to him. They flew through the air like they had wings. They made impossible shots look easy. They lived in big houses and drove fancy cars. But most important of all, they got paid to play the game they loved. Michael started writing again. His handwriting was messy, and he had to erase several words to fix spelling mistakes. But slowly, his essay came together. "When I grow up, I want to be a professional basketball player," he wrote. "I want to play in the NBA and be the best player ever. I practice every day after school and on weekends. I watch games on TV to learn new moves. My dad says I'm getting really good." He paused and chewed on his pencil eraser. What else should he say? How could he make Mrs. Whitfield see that this wasn't just a kid's fantasy? "I know it's hard to become a professional athlete," he continued, "but I'm willing to work harder than anyone else. I want to make my family proud and show people that dreams can come true if you never give up." Michael read over his essay 3 times. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It came straight from his heart. He folded it carefully and put it in his backpack for tomorrow's class. The next morning, Michael walked into room 142 at Laney High School. Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield stood at the front of the classroom, arranging papers on her desk. She was a tall, thin woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her glasses hung from a chain around her neck, and she wore the same stern expression she always had to Mrs. Whitfield had been teaching English for 20 years. She believed in discipline and hard work. She had no patience for students who didn't take their education seriously. And lately, she had been losing patience with Michael Jordan. Michael slid into his seat in the back row and pulled out his essay. Around him, other students were whispering about their assignments. Sarah Jenkins had written about becoming a nurse. Tommy Williams wanted to be a mechanic like his father. Normal jobs for normal kids. "Good morning, class," Mrs. Whitfield said, in her crisp voice. "I hope you all completed your essays about your future goals. Today, we're going to share them with the class." Michael's stomach dropped. Share them? She hadn't said anything about reading them out loud. He looked down at his paper and felt his face getting hot. "Let's start with you, Mr. Jordan," Mrs. Whitfield said, looking directly at him. "Please come to the front and read your essay." Michael's hands shook as he walked to the front of the room. 25 pairs of eyes stared at him. He unfolded his paper and began to read in a quiet voice. "My future goals by Michael Jordan. When I grow up, I want to be a professional basketball player." Someone in the back giggled. Mrs. Whitfield raised her eyebrow but didn't stop him. Michael kept reading, his voice getting smaller with each word. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then Mrs. Whitfield began to speak. "Class, this is a perfect example of unrealistic thinking," she said, her voice sharp as a knife. "Mr. Jordan, you can barely read a book without stumbling over words. Your spelling needs work. Your grammar is poor. And yet you think you can make a living playing games." The class laughed. Not the kind of laugh that happens when something is funny, but the cruel laugh that happens when someone gets embarrassed. Michael felt his face burning with shame. "Professional sports is not a career plan," Mrs. Whitfield continued. "It's a fantasy. You need to focus on developing real skills that will actually help you in life. Maybe you should consider trade school or factory work like your father." Michael stood frozen at the front of the room. He wanted to run away and hide. He wanted to disappear completely. The essay in his hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "You can sit down now, Mr. Jordan," Mrs. Whitfield said. "And I hope this is a lesson to all of you about the importance of setting realistic goals." Michael stumbled back to his seat. His essay fell to the floor, and he left it there. For the rest of the class, he stared out the window and tried not to cry. That night, Michael lay in his bed with his pillow over his head. He could still hear the laughter from his classmates. He could still see the look on Mrs. Whitfield's face when she called his dreams unrealistic. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was just a kid who dreamed too big. Maybe he should give up basketball and focus on something he could actually do. But deep inside, in a place where no teacher's words could reach, a small flame still burned. It was the flame of determination, the flame that would either die out or grow into a fire that would light up the world. Michael fell asleep that night with tears on his pillow and that essay crumpled in his fist. He didn't know it yet, but Mrs. Whitfield had just given him the greatest gift of his life. She had given him something to prove. November 1978. 1 month later, Michael Jordan stood in front of the gym bulletin board, staring at a piece of paper that would change his life forever. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding so hard. He could hear it in his ears. The paper was titled Laney High School Varsity Basketball Team, 1978-79 season. Below that were 15 names typed in neat rows. Michael read through the list once, then twice, then a third time, hoping he had missed something. His name wasn't there. "I don't see it either," said a voice behind him. Michael turned to see his best friend, Leroy Smith, looking just as shocked. Leroy's name was on the list. He had made the varsity team, but Michael Jordan had been cut. "This has to be a mistake," Michael whispered. Other boys crowded around the bulletin board now. Some were celebrating. Others looked disappointed. But no one looked as crushed as Michael Jordan. Coach Clifton "Pop" Herring walked out of his office, carrying a basketball. He was a short, stocky man who had been coaching at Laney for 10 years. He saw the group of boys around the bulletin board and knew what was happening. "Jordan," Coach Herring called out. "Can I see you for a minute?" Michael followed the coach into his small office. The walls were covered with team photos and newspaper clippings from past seasons. Coach Herring sat behind his desk and motioned for Michael to take a seat. "I know you're disappointed," the coach began, "but you're only a sophomore. You've got time to develop." "But I'm better than some of those guys who made the team," Michael said, trying not to cry. "Maybe you are," Coach Herring said, "but they're bigger than you, stronger, more experienced. You're what, 5'10"? Most of those boys are over 6 feet tall." Michael nodded miserably. It was true. He was one of the shorter players who had tried out. "Look, son," Coach Herring continued, "you can still play on the junior varsity team. Get some experience. Work on your game. Maybe next year you'll be ready." Michael wanted to argue. He wanted to tell the coach that he practiced harder than anyone, that basketball was his whole life, that he deserved a chance. But the words wouldn't come. He just nodded and walked out of the office. The rest of that day was a blur. Michael went to his classes, but he couldn't focus on anything. In English class, Mrs. Whitfield was talking about writing techniques, but all Michael could think about was that list on the bulletin board. During lunch, Leroy tried to cheer him up. "Hey, at least we can still play together on JV," he said, but Michael barely heard him. He kept thinking about what Mrs. Whitfield had said a month ago. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was just dreaming too big. Maybe he wasn't good enough for anything. After school, Michael didn't go to JV practice. Instead, he ran straight home. He burst through the front door and headed for his room, but his mother was waiting in the kitchen. "How'd tryouts go?" Dolores asked, though she could tell from his face that something was wrong. "I got cut," Michael said, the words barely coming out. His mother's expression softened. She had seen her son practice for hours every day. She knew how much this meant to him. "Oh, baby," she said, pulling him into a hug. "I'm so sorry." That's when Michael finally broke down. All the tears he had been holding back came flooding out. He cried for his broken dreams. He cried for the embarrassment he felt. He cried because maybe Mrs. Whitfield was right about him after all. "I'm never going to be good enough," he sobbed into his mother's shoulder. "Maybe I should just quit." Dolores held her son tighter. She remembered her own disappointments from when she was young, the dreams that didn't work out, the times when life knocked her down. But she also remembered something else, the importance of getting back up. "Michael Jeffrey Jordan," she said, using his full name like she did when she was being serious. "You listen to me. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you." Michael pulled back and looked at her with red, puffy eyes. "How can this be a good thing?" "Because now you know what you have to work for," she said. "Before today, you thought making the team would be easy. Now you know it's not. So the question is, what are you going to do about it?" Michael wiped his nose with his sleeve. "What do you mean? Are you going to quit and prove that coach right? Or are you going to work harder than you've ever worked before and prove him wrong?" That evening, Michael sat in the backyard behind their house. The old basketball was in his lap, and he was staring up at the stars. His father found him there, around 9 o'clock. "Heard about the team," James said, sitting down on the back steps. "I'm sorry, son." "Dad, do you think I'm wasting my time?" Michael asked. "Maybe I should focus on something else. Mrs. Whitfield says I need to be more realistic." James was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You know, When I was your age, I wanted to play baseball. I was pretty good too, but I let other people convince me it was just a dream. I gave up and went to work in the factory instead." Michael looked at his father with surprise. He had never heard this story before. "I'm not saying I regret my life." James continued, "I love your mother, and I'm proud of all my children. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had kept trying, if I had worked a little harder, if I had believed in myself a little more." "So you think I should keep playing?" Michael asked. "I think you should do whatever makes you happy," James said. "But if basketball makes you happy, then don't let one coach's decision stop you. There will always be people who say you can't do something. The question is, do you believe them, or do you believe in yourself?" The next morning, Michael woke up before dawn. He grabbed his basketball and went out to the driveway. The sun wasn't up yet, but the streetlights gave him enough light to see the hoop that he started shooting. Free throws first, then jump shots from different angles. When he missed, he did push-ups. When he made 5 shots in a row, he moved back a step and shot from farther away to as the sun came up. Michael was still practicing. When it was time for school, he was covered in sweat but felt better than he had in days at school. He found Coach Herring in the gym. "Coach," Michael said, "I want to join the JV team." Coach Herring smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Practice starts at 3:30. In English class that day, Mrs. Whitfield was handing back graded essays. When she got to Michael's desk, she paused. "Mr. Jordan," she said loud enough for others to hear, "I trust you've learned something about setting realistic goals since we last discussed your future plans." Michael looked up at her. For a moment, he felt that familiar shame burning in his chest. But then he remembered his mother's words. "Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing." "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "I've learned that some goals are harder to reach than others. But that doesn't mean they're impossible." Mrs. Whitfield raised an eyebrow. "I see. Well, perhaps you should focus that determination on your studies. Your last quiz grade was quite disappointing." "I'll work harder on that too," Michael said. After school, Michael went to his first JV practice. The other players were good, but Michael noticed something. He was quicker than most of them. He could jump higher. And while they were just playing for fun, Michael was playing like his life depended on it. That night, after practice and homework, Michael went back out to the driveway. He shot baskets until his parents made him come inside. Before bed, he wrote in a notebook his mother had given him. Day 1 after getting cut. Practiced for 3 hours today. Made 47 out of 50 free throws. Tomorrow I'll make 48. Michael fell asleep that night with sore muscles and calluses on his hands. But for the first time since seeing that list on the bulletin board, he fell asleep with hope in his heart. He didn't know it yet, but getting cut from the varsity team was the best thing that could have happened to him. It had lit a fire inside him that would burn for the rest of his life. A fire that no coach, no teacher, and no amount of criticism could ever put out. The boy who had been told he wasn't good enough was about to become unstoppable. August 1979. 10 months later, Michael Jordan stood in front of his bedroom mirror, barely recognizing the person staring back at him. Over the summer, he had grown 4 inches. What had been a skinny 15-year-old was now a lean, muscular 16-year-old who stood 6 feet 3 inches tall. His hands were different too. They were bigger, stronger, and covered with calluses from thousands of hours holding a basketball. His shoulders were broader from all the push-ups he did every time he missed a shot. Even his eyes looked different, more focused, more determined. Michael, breakfast. His mother called from downstairs that it was the first day of his junior year at Laney High School. Michael pulled on his favorite shirt and grabbed his backpack. Today, he would find out if all his hard work had paid off. Today were varsity basketball, tryouts, the breakfast table. His family could feel his nervous energy. Michael barely touched his eggs and toast. He kept bouncing his leg under the table. "You ready for today?" his father asked. "Been ready for 10 months, Michael replied. His little brother Marcus laughed. "Mike's been ready since he was born. All he does is practice basketball." It was true. For the past year, Michael had lived and breathed basketball. He woke up at 5 in the morning to practice before school. He practiced during lunch break. He practiced after JV games. He practiced until his mother forced him to come inside for dinner. During the JV season, Michael had been unstoppable. He averaged 27 points per game and led the team to an undefeated season. Other schools' coaches started asking about the tall sophomore who could fly through the air like he had wings. But there was one person at Laney High School who wasn't impressed with Michael's basketball success. Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield still saw him as the struggling student who couldn't spell properly and dreamed too big. "Mr. Jordan," she said as Michael walked into English class that morning, "I hope you've been spending as much time with your books this summer as you have with that basketball." Michael took his seat in the back row. Over the past year, he had gotten better at reading. He stayed after school twice a week with Mr. Lynch, the librarian, who helped him with his reading skills. Michael discovered he had something called dyslexia, which made reading harder for him. But just like with basketball, he refused to give up. "I've been reading every day, Mrs. Whitfield," Michael said politely. "Good," she said, but her tone suggested she didn't quite believe him. Because athletic ability doesn't last forever. You need real skills for the real world. Some of Michael's classmates looked uncomfortable. Everyone knew about Michael's incredible JV season. The whole school was talking about whether he would make varsity this year. But Mrs. Whitfield seemed determined to keep him humble. "Can anyone tell me what we learned about Shakespeare last year?" Mrs. Whitfield asked the class. Michael raised his hand, surprising everyone. He wrote plays and poems about 400 years ago. His most famous play is probably Romeo and Juliet, which is about two young people whose families hate each other, but they fall in love anyway. Mrs. Whitfield looked shocked that Michael had given such a complete answer. "That's correct, Mr. Jordan. I'm surprised you remember." "I've been practicing," Michael said simply. The truth was, Michael had been practicing everything. His mother had made it clear that if his grades didn't improve, basketball would have to wait. So Michael attacked his studies the same way he attacked basketball, with total dedication. After school, Michael walked slowly toward the gym. A crowd of boys was already gathered outside, waiting for Coach Herring to open the doors. Some were returning varsity players. Others were hoping to make the team for the first time. "Jordan," called out David Bridgers, one of the varsity players from last year. "Heard you grew a foot over the summer." "Just 4 inches," Michael said with a smile. "4 inches taller and about 100 times better," said Leroy Smith, who had played varsity the year before. "You should see him play now, guys. He's incredible." Leroy had been telling everyone about Michael's improvement. They had played pickup games all summer at the local park, and Michael had dominated every single game. He was faster, stronger, and could jump higher than anyone else. Coach Herring opened the gym doors at 3 o'clock. "All right, gentlemen," he announced. "Tryouts start now. We've got 12 spots on varsity this year. May the best players win." For the next 2 hours, Michael played the best basketball of his life. He scored from every angle. He grabbed rebounds over players who were taller than him. He stole passes and turned them into fast break points. Most importantly, he played with a fire that none of the other players could match. When practice ended, Coach Herring pulled Michael aside. "Son," he said, "I owe you an apology. Last year, I told you that you weren't ready for varsity. I was wrong. You've worked harder than any player I've ever coached." Michael felt a surge of pride, but he kept his voice calm. "Thank you, Coach. Does this mean I made the team?" Coach Herring smiled. "Not only did you make the team, you're going to be one of our starting players." Michael wanted to jump up and down and shout, but he just nodded. "I won't let you down, Coach." "I know you won't. The team list will be posted tomorrow morning, but I wanted to tell you personally. You've earned this." Walking home that afternoon, Michael felt like he was floating on air. He had done it. He had made the varsity team. All those early morning practices, all those nights shooting baskets in the dark, all those times people told him he wasn't good enough, it had all been worth it. But the best part was still to come. The next morning, a crowd gathered around the bulletin board in the gym hallway. This time, Michael Jordan's name was at the top of the list. Not only had he made the team, he was listed as a starting guard. Word spread quickly through the school. Teachers congratulated him in the hallways. Students asked for his autograph. Even the principal shook his hand and told him how proud the school was. But when Michael walked into English class that morning, Mrs. Whitfield didn't say a word about his success. She acted like nothing had happened, as if making the varsity basketball team was no big deal. During lunch, Michael overheard a conversation in the teacher's lounge. He was walking past the open door when he heard Mrs. Whitfield talking to Mrs. Peterson, the math teacher. "All this excitement about basketball is ridiculous," Mrs. Whitfield was saying. "These boys get their heads filled with impossible dreams. That Jordan boy is a perfect example." "But Dorothy," Mrs. Peterson said, "He's actually quite good. I heard college scouts are already asking about him." Mrs. Whitfield snorted. "Athletic ability doesn't last forever, Helen. What happens when he gets injured? What happens when he's 30 years old and can't run anymore? He still can barely write a proper essay." Michael felt his face getting hot. Even after everything he had accomplished, Mrs. Whitfield still didn't believe in him, still thought he was wasting his time. "He needs to focus on developing real skills," Mrs. Whitfield continued. "Basketball is just a game. It's not a career." Michael walked away before he heard any more. But Mrs. Whitfield's words echoed in his head for the rest of the day. Even after proving himself on the basketball court, even after improving his grades, she still saw him as a failure waiting to happen. That night, Michael lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow was his first varsity practice as a starter. He should have been excited. Instead, he kept thinking about what Mrs. Whitfield had said. Maybe she was right. Maybe basketball was just a game. Maybe he was fooling himself thinking he could make a career out of it. But then Michael remembered something his father had told him. There will always be people who say you can't do something. The question is, do you believe them, or do you believe in yourself? Michael got out of bed and walked to his window. In the driveway below, the basketball hoop stood silhouetted against the streetlight. He had shot thousands of baskets at that hoop. Each one had been practiced for this moment. He thought about all the people who had doubted him, the coach who cut him, the classmates who laughed at his essay, the teacher who called his dreams unrealistic. Let them doubt, Michael thought. Let them say it's impossible. I'll show them what impossible looks like. Michael Jordan fell asleep that night with a new kind of determination burning in his chest. It wasn't just about making the team anymore. It wasn't just about proving Coach Herring wrong. Now it was about proving everyone wrong, especially Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield. The boy who had been told he would never amount to anything was about to become something extraordinary. And every person who had ever doubted him would have a front row seat to watch it happen. Spring 1981, senior year, the gymnasium at Laney High School was packed to capacity. Parents, students, and teachers filled every seat, and more people stood along the walls. They had all come to watch Michael Jordan play his final home game as a high school student. In the stands, college scouts from Duke, North Carolina State, and the University of North Carolina held notebooks and stopwatches. They had been following Michael all season, watching him dominate game after game. Michael stood at the free throw line with 10 seconds left on the clock. Laney was down by 1 point. The visiting team had just fouled him on a drive to the basket. 2 free throws to win the game. 2 free throws to cap off an incredible senior season. The gym fell silent. Michael bounced the ball 3 times, just like he had practiced thousands of times in his driveway. He could see his parents in the crowd, holding hands and watching nervously. He could see his teammates on the bench, leaning forward with hope in their eyes. And there, in the teachers' section, he could see Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield. She sat with her arms crossed, watching with the same stern expression she always wore. Michael took a deep breath and shot. Swish. The score was tied. He got the ball back for his second shot. This was it. This was the moment that would decide the game. Michael bounced the ball again, focused on the rim, and let it fly. Swish. The crowd erupted. Students rushed onto the court. His teammates lifted Michael onto their shoulders. Cameras flashed as reporters took pictures of the local hero, who had just hit the game-winning shots. But through all the celebration, Michael's eyes found Mrs. Whitfield in the crowd. She was clapping politely, but her expression hadn't changed. Even after watching him score 38 points and win the game, she still looked unimpressed. The next Monday morning, the principal's voice crackled over the school's intercom system during first period. "Attention students and faculty," Principal Edwards announced. "I'm proud to announce that Michael Jordan has accepted a full basketball scholarship to the University of North Carolina. Please join me in congratulating Michael on this incredible achievement." The entire school erupted in cheers. Students banged on their desks and whistled. Teachers smiled and nodded approvingly. Michael Jordan, the kid from Gordon Road, was going to college for free to play basketball. In English class, Mrs. Whitfield paused her lesson about writing techniques and looked directly at Michael. For a moment, he thought she might finally say something positive. Maybe she would congratulate him or admit that she had been wrong about his dreams. Instead, she simply said, "That's nice, Mr. Jordan. Now, let's return to our discussion of proper Paragraph structure. Michael felt his face flush with disappointment. Even this wasn't enough to impress her. After school, Michael was walking to his car when he heard familiar voices coming from the teacher's lounge. The door was slightly open, and he could hear Mrs. Whitfield talking to several other teachers. "Hey, basketball scholarship," she was saying. "Well, I suppose that's one way to get into college when your grades aren't quite up to par." "Dorothy, that's not fair," said Mr. Lynch, the librarian who had helped Michael with his reading. "Michael has worked very hard to improve his academics. His grades are perfectly fine now. Besides," added Coach Herring, who had joined the conversation, "do you have any idea how hard it is to get a scholarship to North Carolina? Dean Smith only recruits the very best players in the country." Mrs. Whitfield made a dismissive sound. "Athletic scholarships are just a way for colleges to get cheap. Entertainment. What happens when Michael can't play anymore? What real skills does he have for the working world?" Michael couldn't listen anymore. He walked away, but her words followed him like a dark cloud. No matter what he accomplished, Mrs. Whitfield always found a way to make it seem worthless. Point 2. Weeks later, Michael sat in his family's living room with the most famous basketball coach in America. Dean Smith from the University of North Carolina was sitting on their old couch, drinking sweet tea and talking to Michael's parents about their son's future. "Mr. and Mrs. Jordan," Coach Smith said in his calm, measured voice, "I want you to know that we don't just recruit basketball players at Carolina. We recruit young men of character. Michael has both the athletic ability and the personal qualities we look for." Dolores Jordan beamed with pride. "We've always tried to raise our children to work hard and treat people right. It shows," Coach Smith said. "Michael is going to do great things at Carolina, both on the court and in the classroom. I guarantee you that." James Jordan shook the coach's hand. "We trust you with our son, Coach Smith. Just make sure he gets his education." "That's a promise," Coach Smith replied. After Coach Smith left, the Jordan family sat around the kitchen table in amazement. Their son was going to one of the best universities in the country. He would get a free education and play basketball for the most successful college program in America. "I'm so proud of you, baby," Dolores said, hugging Michael tightly. "We all are," James added. "You've worked for this. You've earned it." But even in this moment of triumph, Michael found himself thinking about Mrs. Whitfield. Tomorrow, he would have to face her in English class again. He wondered if she would finally acknowledge his success. The next morning, Michael walked into room 142 with his head held high. Several classmates congratulated him on the scholarship. Sarah Jenkins, who sat in the front row, turned around and said, "My mom says you're going to be famous someday." When Mrs. Whitfield entered the classroom, she carried a stack of graded papers. She began handing them back to students, making comments about their work. "Mr. Williams, your essay about career goals was much more realistic than some I've read in this class," she said, glancing briefly at Michael when she reached Michael's desk. She placed his paper face down without saying anything. Michael flipped it over to see a C- grade and a note written in red ink. "Still need to focus on practical skills. Have a backup plan." Michael stared at the grade in disbelief. The essay was about his goals for college and his dreams of playing professional basketball someday. Even after getting a scholarship to UNC, Mrs. Whitfield was still telling him to have a backup plan. His friend Leroy, who sat next to him, saw the grade and shook his head. "I don't understand her," he whispered. "What more do you have to do to prove yourself?" Michael folded the paper and put it in his backpack. He was starting to realize that nothing would ever be enough for Mrs. Whitfield. She had made up her mind about him 3 years ago, and no amount of success would change her opinion. But something else was becoming clear to Michael too. Mrs. Whitfield's doubt wasn't hurting him anymore. It was fueling him. Every time she dismissed his achievements, he became more determined to reach the next level. That afternoon, during his final practice at Laney High School, Michael played with an intensity that surprised even his teammates. He dove for every loose ball, made every shot, and pushed himself harder than ever before. "What's gotten into you today?" Coach Herring asked during a water break. Michael looked toward the school building, where he knew Mrs. Whitfield was probably grading papers and telling students to be realistic about their futures. "Just thinking about all the people I'm going to prove wrong," Michael said. 3 months later, graduation day arrived. Michael walked across the stage to receive his diploma, wearing his cap and gown with pride. In the audience, his family cheered loudly. College scouts and reporters took pictures. The whole community celebrated their hometown hero. As Michael scanned the crowd of teachers and faculty, he looked for Mrs. Whitfield one last time. He wanted to see her face as he graduated and prepared to attend one of the best universities in America on a full scholarship. But she wasn't there. Later, Michael learned that Mrs. Whitfield had called in sick that day. She had missed his graduation ceremony. Whether it was really an illness or something else, Michael would never know. As he drove away from Laney High School for the last time as a student, Michael thought about the journey that had brought him to this point. The essay that had been mocked, the team he had been cut from, the teacher who had never believed in him. All of it had led to this moment. All of it had made him stronger. In a few months, Michael Jordan would be playing basketball at the University of North Carolina. He would be studying at one of the finest schools in the country. He would be chasing his dreams at the highest level. And somewhere in Wilmington, North Carolina, Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield would be teaching a new group of students about the importance of being realistic. But Michael Jordan was done being realistic. He was ready to be extraordinary. March 29, 1982, New Orleans, Louisiana. 17 seconds left on the clock. The University of North Carolina was down by 1 point to Georgetown University in the NCAA championship game. 61,000 people in the Superdome were on their feet, screaming so loud that the players could barely hear themselves think. Michael Jordan, now a 19-year-old freshman, stood on the court with sweat dripping down his face. His legs were tired from playing 37 minutes of the biggest game of his life. But his mind was crystal clear. Coach Dean Smith called a timeout and gathered his players around him. The noise was deafening, but Coach Smith's voice cut through the chaos. "We're going to run the play we've practiced 1,000 times," he said calmly. "Get the ball to Michael on the left side. Michael, take the shot if you're open." Michael nodded. This was the moment he had dreamed about since he was 15 years old, shooting baskets in his driveway back in Wilmington. The referee handed the ball to Jimmy Black, Carolina's point guard. Jimmy dribbled across half court as the clock ticked down. 15 seconds. 14. 13. Jimmy passed the ball to Michael on the left wing. Michael caught it, took one dribble, and rose up for a jump shot. The Georgetown defender lunged at him, but Michael was already in the air, floating like he was flying. The ball left his fingertips with perfect rotation. It arced through the air as 61,000 people held their breath. The ball swished through the net with 15 seconds left on the clock. North Carolina 63, Georgetown 62. The crowd exploded. Michael's teammates rushed toward him. "Coach!" Smith pumped his fist in the air. In that moment, Michael Jordan became a national hero. Georgetown got the ball back, but their final shot missed. When the buzzer sounded, Michael found himself at the bottom of a pile of celebrating teammates. He had just hit the shot that won the NCAA championship. Back in Wilmington, North Carolina, Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield sat alone in her small living room, watching the game on her old television. She had been following Michael's college career, though she would never admit it to anyone. When Michael hit the championship-winning shot, Mrs. Whitfield didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She just reached for the remote control and turned off the television. "Lucky shot," she muttered to herself. But deep in a closet in her bedroom, hidden under old blankets, was a box that told a different story. Inside that box were newspaper clippings from Michael's high school games, articles about his scholarship to UNC, and now she would add the newspaper stories about his championship-winning shot. Mrs. Whitfield had been collecting articles about Michael Jordan for 4 years. She told herself it was just curiosity, but the truth was more complicated than that. 4 years later, 1986, Michael Jordan was now a legend at the University of North Carolina. He had led the team to one championship and several more tournament appearances. He was the best college basketball player in America, and everyone knew he would be a star in the NBA. Back at Laney High School, things had changed. The school was proud of their most famous graduate. Michael's retired jersey hung in the gymnasium. His picture was in the trophy case by the main entrance, but Mrs. Whitfield continued teaching English in the same classroom, assigning the same essays about future goals. When students wrote about becoming professional athletes, she would shake her head and tell them to be more realistic. "You're not Michael Jordan," she would say. "He was a special case." Some of the younger teachers found this attitude strange. Mr. Patterson, who had been hired to teach history, couldn't understand it. "Why don't you ever talk about Michael Jordan's success?" he asked Mrs. Whitfield one day in the teacher's lounge. "He's proof that big dreams can come true." Mrs. Whitfield stirred her coffee slowly. "One success story doesn't mean everyone should chase impossible dreams," she said. "For every Michael Jordan, there are 1,000 boys who waste their time playing games instead of preparing for real careers." "But surely you must be proud of him," Mr. Patterson pressed. "You taught him. You were part of his journey." Mrs. Whitfield's expression hardened. "I taught him English. That's all. His basketball success has nothing to do with me." 1984, the Olympics. Michael Jordan was selected to play for the United States Olympic basketball team. The team was coached by Bob Knight and included the best college players in America. They traveled to Los Angeles and won the gold medal easily. When Michael returned to North Carolina with his Olympic medal, the whole state celebrated. Newspapers ran stories about the local hero who was representing America on the world stage. Mrs. Whitfield read every article. She cut them out carefully and added them to her secret collection. But when her fellow teachers talked about Michael's Olympic success, she remained silent. 1984, the NBA draft. After his junior year at UNC, Michael decided to enter the NBA draft. He was selected 3rd overall by the Chicago Bulls. The Portland Trail Blazers had picked Sam Bowie instead of Michael with the 2nd pick, a decision that would haunt them forever. Michael's first NBA contract was worth $6.15 million over 7 years. It was more money than anyone in Wilmington had ever imagined. The boy from Gordon Road was now a millionaire at Laney High School. The teachers gathered around the radio in the faculty lounge to hear the draft results. When Michael's name was called, everyone cheered except Mrs. Whitfield. $6 million. To play a children's game, she said disapprovingly. "What kind of world are we living in?" "Dorothy," said Mrs. Henderson, the math teacher, "aren't you even a little bit proud? He was your student." Mrs. Whitfield gathered her papers and stood up. "I'm proud of students who become doctors and teachers and engineers," she said. "People who contribute something meaningful to society." She walked out of the lounge, leaving the other teachers shaking their heads. 1991, the first championship. 7 years later, Michael Jordan had become the most famous athlete in the world. He had won 5 NBA scoring titles, 2 MVP awards, and countless other honors. But the one thing that had escaped him was an NBA championship. In June 1991, the Chicago Bulls finally won their first title. Michael cried tears of joy as he held the championship trophy. The image was broadcast around the world. In Wilmington, the whole city celebrated. Local bars threw parties. The newspaper printed a special edition. Michael Jordan was no longer just a basketball player. He was a global icon. Mrs. Whitfield, now 69 years old, watched the championship celebration alone in her living room. For the first time since Michael had been her student, she allowed herself a small smile. But the next day, when her neighbors congratulated her for teaching the world champion, she just shrugged. "He was just another student," she said. The secret collection grows over the years. Mrs. Whitfield's secret collection grew larger. She had articles about Michael's first championship, his second, his third. She had stories about his commercials with Nike. She had pictures of him meeting presidents and movie stars. She kept every article about his retirement in 1993 to play baseball. She saved the stories about his return to basketball in 1995. She collected the coverage of his 4th, 5th, and 6th championships. By 1998, when Michael won his final championship with the Bulls, Mrs. Whitfield had been collecting articles about him for 20 years. The box in her closet was full of newspaper clippings, magazine covers, and photographs, but she never told anyone about the collection. She never bragged about teaching the most famous athlete in the world. She never even admitted to watching his games. Everyone who knew her, Dorothy Whitfield, was just a retired English teacher who believed in hard work and realistic goals. Nobody knew that she had followed every step of Michael Jordan's incredible journey. And hidden at the bottom of her secret box, carefully preserved for all those years, was a yellow piece of paper with messy teenage handwriting. It was Michael's original essay from 1978, the one about becoming a professional basketball player, the essay she had mocked in front of the entire class. The essay that had predicted, with startling accuracy, exactly what Michael Jordan would become. Mrs. Whitfield had kept it for 20 years, though she couldn't explain why. Sometimes, Late at night, she would take it out and read it again. The boy's words were simple but powerful. When I grow up, I want to be a professional basketball player. I want to play in the NBA and be the best player ever. I practice every day after school and on weekends. I know it's hard to become a professional athlete, but I'm willing to work harder than anyone else. I want to make my family proud and show people that dreams can come true if you never give up. Every word had come true. Every single prediction had been fulfilled beyond even Michael's wildest dreams. And Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield, the teacher who had called those dreams unrealistic, had been wrong about everything. Everything except one thing she could never have known at the time. Her harsh words had been exactly what Michael Jordan needed to hear. June 2010, Wilmington, North Carolina. The last bell of the school year rang at Laney High School, but Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield barely heard it. She sat at her desk in room 142, looking around at the empty classroom that had been her second home for 40 years. Boxes lined the walls, filled with lesson plans, graded papers, and teaching supplies. After 4 decades of molding young minds, Dorothy Whitfield was finally retiring. At 68 years old, she was ready to close this chapter of her life. Students had already stopped by to say goodbye. Some brought cards and flowers. Others just wanted to thank her for being tough on them, for pushing them to do better. Even the students who complained about her strict methods usually came to appreciate her later, but there was one student she had been thinking about all day. One student who had never come back to visit, never sent a thank you card, never acknowledged their shared history. Michael Jordan. Dorothy packed the last of her personal items into a cardboard box. On top, she placed a small framed photo, the only picture of Michael she kept on display. It was from the school newspaper, showing him receiving his diploma at graduation in 1981. She had cut it out 30 years ago and kept it on her desk ever since. The janitor, Mr. Williams, peeked into her classroom. "Need any help carrying things to your car, Mrs. Whitfield?" "No thank you, James," she said. "I can manage." But as she lifted the box, her arthritis flared up and she winced. Teaching had taken a toll on her body over the years. Her hands ached from grading thousands of papers. Her back hurt from standing at the blackboard. Her voice was hoarse from talking all day, every day, for 40 years. James stepped forward and took the box from her. "Let me help anyway. It's the least I can do after all you've done for this school." As they walked down the hallway together, Dorothy looked at the walls one last time. Michael's retired jersey still hung in a display case near the gymnasium. His picture was still in the trophy case by the main entrance. Everywhere she looked, there were reminders of the school's most famous graduate. "Mrs. Whitfield," James said as they reached her car, "can I ask you something I've always wondered about?" "Of course. Did you really teach Michael Jordan? I mean, were you actually his teacher?" Dorothy nodded. "I taught him English for 3 years. 9th, 10th, and 11th grade." "What was he like?" James asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. "I mean, before he was famous. Was he special even then?" Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. How could she explain what Michael had been like? How could she describe the complicated feelings she had carried for 30 years? "He was determined," she said finally. "More determined than any student I ever taught." James loaded the box into her trunk. "You must be so proud of him. I bet you always knew he'd be successful." Dorothy forced a smile. "Yes," she said. "I always knew." But as James walked away and Dorothy drove home to her small house on 3rd Street, she knew she had just told a lie. She hadn't always known Michael would be successful. In fact, she had done everything she could to convince him he wouldn't be. Dorothy's house. That evening, Dorothy's house was small and quiet. She had lived alone since her husband died 15 years earlier. The walls were covered with photos of former students, thank you cards, and teaching awards. It looked like the home of someone who had devoted her entire life to education. But there was one room in the house that told a different story. Dorothy's bedroom was simple and neat, with a single bed, a dresser, and a small reading chair by the window. But in the closet, hidden behind hanging clothes and old shoes, was a cardboard box that contained her deepest secret. Dorothy pulled the box out carefully and set it on her bed. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. Inside were hundreds of newspaper clippings, magazine articles, and photographs. All of them were about Michael Jordan. The collection started with articles from his high school days at Laney. There were game reports from the local newspaper, stories about his scholarship to UNC, and photos from his graduation. Dorothy had saved every single one. Then came the college articles. Stories about his game-winning shot in the NCAA championship. Features about his Olympic gold medal. Reports about him entering the NBA draft. Dorothy had followed every step of his journey, cutting out articles and storing them in this secret box. The professional career clippings took up most of the space. 6 NBA championships, 5 MVP awards, countless scoring titles, and all-star selections. Magazine covers from Sports Illustrated, Time, and Newsweek. Photos of Michael meeting presidents and movie stars. Articles about his Nike deal and his billion-dollar empire. Dorothy spread some of the articles across her bed, looking at the timeline of an extraordinary life. From a teenage boy with big dreams to the most famous athlete in the world. Every major moment was documented in her secret collection. The bottom of the box, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was the most important item of all. Michael's original essay from 1978. The one he had written about becoming a professional basketball player. The one she had mocked in front of the entire class. Dorothy unfolded the yellow paper and read it again, just as she had done hundreds of times. Over the years, My Future Goals by Michael Jordan. When I grow up, I want to be a professional basketball player. I want to play in the NBA and be the best player ever. I practice every day after school and on weekends. I watch games on TV to learn new moves. My dad says I'm getting really good. I know it's hard to become a professional athlete, but I'm willing to work harder than anyone else. I want to make my family proud and show people that dreams can come true if you never give up. The 15-year-old boy's handwriting was messy and some words were misspelled, but every prediction had come true. Michael had become a professional basketball player. He had made it to the NBA. He had become the best player ever. He had made his family proud. He had shown the world that dreams can come true. And Dorothy Whitfield, his English teacher, had called those dreams unrealistic. Tears began to fall down Dorothy's cheeks as she held the essay. For 32 years, she had carried a secret that was eating her alive. A secret about why she had been so hard on Michael Jordan. A secret about her true feelings toward the boy who became a legend. Dorothy reached into the bottom of the box and pulled out another piece of paper. This one was newer, written in her own careful handwriting. It was a letter she had written to Michael 5 years earlier, but never sent. She had written dozens of letters to him over the years, trying to explain herself, trying to apologize. But she had never been brave enough to mail any of them. The letter began, "Dear Michael, you probably don't remember me, but I was your English teacher at Laney High School. I need to tell you something I should have told you 30 years ago." Dorothy folded the letter and put it back in the box. What was the point of explaining now? Michael was 57 years old and worth over $1 billion. He was married with children and grandchildren. He was one of the most successful people who had ever lived. Why would he care about the regrets of an old teacher who had doubted him? But as Dorothy prepared for bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about Michael's essay. The boy had written with such confidence, such determination. He had believed in himself completely, even when she had tried to tear that belief down. Maybe that was the real lesson. Maybe the harshest critics sometimes create the strongest champions. Maybe the people who say you can't are just as important as the people who say you can. Dorothy fell asleep that night holding Michael's essay, wondering if she would ever get the chance to tell him the truth. The truth about why she had been so hard on him. The truth about how proud she was of everything he had accomplished. The truth about the secret she had been keeping for more than 30 years. In her dreams, she was back in room 142, watching. A 15-year-old Michael Jordan read his essay about becoming a professional basketball player. But this time, instead of mocking his dreams, she said the words she had always wanted to say. "That's a wonderful goal, Michael. I believe you can do anything you set your mind to." But it was only a dream. In the real world, Dorothy Whitfield would have to live with the knowledge that she had been the teacher who almost crushed the spirit of the greatest basketball player who ever lived. And the most painful part was knowing that Michael had succeeded not because of her encouragement, but in spite of her doubt. September 15th, 2023, 13 years later, Dorothy Whitfield sat in her favorite chair by the window, reading the morning newspaper. At 81 years old, she moved more slowly than she used to, but her mind was still sharp. The arthritis in her hands made it hard to hold the paper steady, but she refused to give up her daily routine. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Dorothy had been living alone for 28 years now, ever since her husband passed away. Her children visited when they could, but they had busy lives in other cities. Most days, Dorothy's only companions were her books and her memories. She was reading about the local high school football season when the phone rang. Dorothy looked at the caller ID and frowned. The number wasn't familiar, but it showed a Chicago area code. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Is this Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield?" asked a professional-sounding woman's voice. "Yes, it is. Who is this?" "Mrs. Whitfield, my name is Sarah Mitchell, and I work for Michael Jordan. I'm calling about a special event at Laney High School next month." Dorothy's hands began to shake. She almost dropped the phone. "Michael Jordan," she repeated, though she knew exactly who the woman was talking about. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Jordan is returning to Wilmington on September 28th for the dedication of a new basketball court at Laney High School. The court will be named in his honor. We understand that you were one of his teachers." Dorothy's mind raced. Michael was coming back to Laney. After all these years, he was finally returning to the place where it all began. Yes, I taught him English," Dorothy said quietly. "Wonderful," Sarah continued. "Mr. Jordan specifically requested that we reach out to his former teachers. He would very much like to see you at the ceremony. And if possible, he was hoping to meet with you privately afterward." Dorothy felt dizzy. Michael wanted to meet with her? After 45 years, what could he possibly want to say? "Mrs. Whitfield, are you still there?" Sarah asked. "Yes, I'm here. This is very unexpected. I understand. Would you be available to meet with Mr. Jordan on the 28th? It would mean a great deal to him." Dorothy closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had dreaded this moment for decades. The moment when she would have to face Michael Jordan and answer for what she had done to him as a teenager. "Yes," she said finally. "I'll be there." "Excellent. I'll send you all the details." "And Mrs. Whitfield? Mr. Jordan asked me to tell you that he's been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time." After Sarah hung up, Dorothy sat in her chair for nearly an hour without moving. Michael had been looking forward to talking to her. What did that mean? Was he angry? Did he want to confront her about the way she had treated him? Dorothy walked slowly to her bedroom and pulled out the cardboard box from her closet. She opened it and looked at all the articles she had collected over the years. Then she picked up the letter she had written to Michael but never sent. Maybe it was time to finally tell him the truth. The next day, Dorothy sat at her kitchen table with a pen and a fresh piece of paper. Her handwriting wasn't as neat as it used to be, but she was determined to get the words right this time. She had tried to write this letter so many times over the years. Each time, she had gotten a few paragraphs in before giving up. The truth was too complicated, too painful to explain. But now Michael was coming back. In 2 weeks, she would have to face him in person. If she was going to tell him the truth, she needed to be ready. Dorothy began to write. "Dear Michael, I know you probably don't want to hear from me after all these years. I was your English teacher at Laney High School from 1978 to 1981. I was the teacher who told you that your dreams were unrealistic. I was the teacher who tried to make you give up on basketball, that I need you to know something that I should have told you 45 years ago. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to protect you." Dorothy paused and looked out the window. How could she explain what she had done? How could she make him understand? She continued writing. "In 1978, I overheard a conversation between 2 other teachers. They were talking about your struggles with reading and said you would never succeed in school. One of them said that someone should tell you to give up your basketball dreams before you got hurt. That I knew that wasn't true. I could see how smart you were, even if reading was difficult for you. I could see your determination and your character. But I was afraid that if you focused only on basketball and it didn't work out, you would have nothing to fall back on. So I made a terrible decision. I thought if I was hard on you, if I challenged your dreams, you would work twice as hard to prove me wrong. I thought it would make you stronger. I was wrong about my methods, but I was right about one thing. You were stronger than anyone imagined. Every harsh word I said to you only made you more determined. Every time I doubted you, you came back harder than before. I have followed your entire career, Michael. I have saved every newspaper article about your success. I still have the essay you wrote in 1978 about becoming a professional basketball player. Every word of it came true. I was never your enemy, even though I acted like one. I was just a scared teacher who didn't know how else to help a special student reach his potential. I have regretted my approach every single day for 45 years. Can you ever forgive an old woman who cared about you enough to make you hate her? Dorothy finished the letter and read it over 3 times. It still didn't capture everything she wanted to say, but it was honest. It was the truth she had been carrying in her heart for nearly half a century. She folded the letter carefully and put it in an envelope. Then she wrote, "Michael Jordan," on the front in her shaky handwriting. 2 weeks later, September 27th, night before Michael's visit, Dorothy couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about what she would say to him. The letter was in her purse, ready to give to him when they met. She thought about the 15-year-old boy who had sat in her classroom, full of dreams and determination. She thought about the man he had become, successful beyond anyone's wildest imagination, respected around the world, beloved by millions of fans, and she thought about her role in his story. Had her harsh words really helped make him stronger? Or had she just been a cruel teacher who was lucky that her student succeeded despite her efforts to discourage him? Dorothy knew she would find out tomorrow. After 45 years of wondering, she would finally learn how Michael Jordan really felt about the teacher who had tried to crush his dreams. She closed her eyes and prayed that he would understand, that he would forgive her, that somehow, after all these years, they could find peace with the past. The phone call had started it all. Tomorrow, Dorothy Whitfield would face the most important conversation of her life. September 28th, 2023, 3:30 p.m. Dorothy Whitfield stood in the parking lot of Laney High School, clutching her purse with trembling hands. Inside the purse was the letter she had written to Michael, the letter that contained 45 years of truth. The dedication ceremony had ended an hour ago. Dorothy had watched from the back of the crowd as Michael gave his speech to hundreds of people. He talked about hard work, determination, and never giving up on your dreams. He thanked his family, his coaches, and his teammates. He didn't mention any of his teachers. Now the crowd was gone, and Dorothy was supposed to meet Michael in his old English classroom. Room 142, the same room where she had crushed his dreams. When he was 15 years old, Dorothy walked slowly through the school's front doors. Her legs felt weak, and she had to stop twice to catch her breath. The hallways looked exactly the same as they had when she retired 13 years ago. The same lockers, the same bulletin boards, the same smell of cleaning supplies and teenage energy, but everything felt different now. This wasn't her school anymore. She was just a visitor, an old woman coming back to face the biggest mistake of her teaching career. As she approached room 142, Dorothy could see someone sitting at her old desk. Even from behind, she recognized the tall figure and broad shoulders. Michael Jordan was waiting for her. Dorothy knocked gently on the doorframe. Michael turned around, and for the first time in 45 years, their eyes met. That he looked older. Of course, his hair was gray now, and there were lines around his eyes. But he still had the same intense stare that had made him such a fierce competitor. The same presence that commanded respect wherever he went. "Mrs. Whitfield," Michael said, standing up from the desk. His voice was deeper than she remembered, but it was unmistakably him. "Hello, Michael," Dorothy replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, Mr. Jordan." "Michael is fine," he said, gesturing to a student desk in the front row. "Please have a seat." Dorothy sat down carefully, feeling strange to be on the other side of the classroom for once. Michael remained standing, looking down at her with an unreadable expression. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like a bridge across 45 years of history. Finally, Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old and worn, as if it had been handled many times. "I've been carrying this for 32 years, Michael said, holding up the paper. "I wrote it in 1991, right after I won my first NBA championship. It's a letter to you." Dorothy felt her heart skip a beat. "To me?" "Yes. I wrote it because I wanted to tell you how much your words hurt me. How you made me feel worthless when I was just a kid with big dreams." Michael unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. "Dear Mrs. Whitfield, you probably don't remember me, but I remember you. I remember every word you said to me. I remember how you made me feel small and stupid. I remember how you laughed at my dreams and told me I would never amount to anything. I wanted you to know that I proved you wrong. I became everything you said was impossible." Dorothy felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had known this day would come eventually. The day when Michael would confront her about the pain she had caused him. But I never sent this letter. Michael continued, folding it back up. Do you know why? Dorothy shook her head, not trusting her voice to speak. Because I realized something. Your words didn't destroy me. They made me stronger. Every time someone told me I couldn't do something, I heard your voice in my head, and I used that doubt as fuel to work harder. Michael sat down on the edge of the desk, bringing himself closer to Dorothy's eye level. Mrs. Whitfield, I need to ask you something. Why were you so hard on me? What did I do to make you hate my dreams so much? This was the moment Dorothy had been preparing for. She reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out her own letter, the one she had written just 2 weeks ago. Michael, she said, her voice cracking with emotion. I need to tell you something I should have told you 45 years ago. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to save you. Michael's expression softened slightly. What do you mean? Dorothy opened her letter and began to read, her hands trembling as she held the paper. In 1978, I overheard a conversation between 2 other teachers. They were talking about your struggles with reading. One of them said you would never make it past high school. Another said someone should tell you to give up your basketball dreams before you got hurt. Michael leaned forward, listening intently. I knew they were wrong. Dorothy continued. I could see how intelligent you were, even if reading was difficult. For you, I could see your determination and your character. But I was terrified that if you focused only on basketball and it didn't work out, you would have nothing to fall back on. Tears were flowing freely down Dorothy's cheeks now. So I made a terrible choice. I thought if I was hard on you, if I challenged your dreams, you would work twice as hard to prove me wrong. I thought it would make you ready for how cruel the world could be. Dorothy looked up at Michael, searching his face for any sign of understanding. I was wrong about my methods, but I was right about one thing. You were stronger than anyone imagined. Every harsh word I said only made you more determined. Every time I doubted you, you came back harder than before. Michael sat in stunned silence, processing what he was hearing. I have followed your entire career, Dorothy continued. I have saved every newspaper article about your success. I still have the essay you wrote in 1978 about becoming a professional basketball player. Every word of it came true. She reached back into her purse and pulled out the yellow piece of paper, Michael's original essay from high school. She handed it to him with shaking hands. Michael unfolded the essay and stared at his teenage handwriting. The paper was fragile with age, but every word was still clear. You kept this? He asked in amazement. For 45 years, Dorothy whispered. I've regretted my approach every single day. I was never your enemy, Michael. I was just a scared teacher who didn't know how else to help a special student reach his potential. Michael looked from the essay to Dorothy's tear-stained face. Everything he thought he knew about his past was shifting before his eyes. I've been waiting for this day for decades, Dorothy said, waiting for the chance to apologize. To tell you the truth, can you ever forgive an old woman who cared about you enough to make you hate her? Michael stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the school parking lot where he used to dream of greatness. Dorothy watched him, holding her breath and waiting for his response. When Michael finally turned back to face her, there were tears in his eyes too. Mrs. Whitfield, he said softly, you gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You made me believe I had to work twice as hard as everyone else. You made me hungry in a way that success never could have. He walked back over to where she was sitting and knelt down beside her chair. Thank you, he said, taking her weathered hands in his. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I thought you had. Dorothy sobbed openly now, 45 years of guilt and regret pouring out of her. Michael reached out and hugged the old woman who had shaped his life in ways she was only now beginning to understand. I'm so sorry, Dorothy whispered into his shoulder. I'm so sorry for the way I treated you. Don't be sorry, Michael said, his own voice thick with emotion. You helped make me who I am. I just wish I had understood sooner. They held each other in that empty classroom, surrounded by the ghosts of the past. The 15-year-old boy, with impossible dreams, and the teacher who had tried to protect him in the only way she knew how. Outside, the sun was beginning to set over Wilmington. But inside room 142, two people who had misunderstood each other for nearly half a century had finally found their way to the truth. And it was more beautiful than either of them had ever imagined. September 28, 2023, 4:45 p.m. Michael and Dorothy sat quietly in room 142 as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the classroom floor. Both of their letters lay on the desk between them. Michael's angry words from 1991 and Dorothy's confession from 2 weeks ago. The yellow essay from 1978 rested beside them, a bridge between past and present. Michael wiped his eyes and looked around the classroom that had shaped so much of his life. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said softly, "I need to tell you something else. Something I've never told anyone." Dorothy looked up at him, her own tears still fresh on her cheeks. "That day when you made me read my essay in front of the class," Michael continued, "when everyone laughed at my dreams, I went home that night and almost threw away every basketball I owned." Dorothy's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh no, Michael, I never wanted that." "I know that now," he said. "But then, I was just a 15-year-old kid who felt completely broken. I sat on my bed with a trash bag, ready to give up everything I loved." Michael stood up and walked to the window where he used to stare during English class, dreaming of basketball courts and championships. "But then my mother found me," he said. "She asked me what was wrong, and I told her about your words. About how you said I was wasting my time dreaming." Dorothy listened, her heart breaking as she imagined the scene. "My mother sat down next to me and said something I'll never forget. She said, 'Baby, sometimes the people who push us the hardest are the ones who believe in us the most. They just don't always know how to show it.'" Michael turned back to face Dorothy. "My mother was right, wasn't she? You did believe in me. You just showed it in a way I couldn't understand at the time." Dorothy nodded, unable to speak through her tears. "There's something else," Michael said, sitting back down. "Do you remember what you used to do when I struggled with reading in class?" Dorothy thought back to those long ago days. I made you read aloud. I thought practice would help, even though it was difficult for you. You made me read aloud, yes. But do you remember what you did afterward?" Dorothy shook her head. "You would assign me extra reading homework. Books that were exactly at my level. Not too easy, not too hard. You never told the other students about it. You just quietly gave me books that would help me improve." Dorothy's eyes widened. She had forgotten about those extra assignments. "And when I started getting better grades on my essays," Michael continued, "you wrote notes in the margins. Not criticism, encouragement. You wrote things like good improvement and much better sentence structure." Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out another piece of paper. This one was newer, but still old. It was a graded essay from his junior year with Dorothy's handwriting in the margins. "I kept this one," he said, showing her the paper, "because it was the first time you wrote excellent work on one of my assignments. I carried it with me to UNC. I carried it through my whole career." Dorothy stared at the essay, remembering the bright junior who had worked so hard to improve his writing skills. "You were teaching me in 2 different ways," Michael said. "In front of the class, you were tough on me, making me work harder. But privately, you were helping me succeed. You were preparing me for both failure and success." Dorothy finally found her voice. "I watched you grow so much that year. Your reading improved dramatically. Your writing became clearer and stronger. But I was afraid to praise you too much in front of the other students." "What?" Michael asked. Dorothy took a deep breath. "Because I knew how special you were. I knew you had gifts that other students didn't have. But I also knew the world would be twice as hard on you because of those gifts. I thought if I was tough on you in school, you'd be ready for whatever came next." Michael nodded slowly. "You were preparing me for critics, for people who would doubt me, for moments when I'd have to prove myself over and over again." "Yes," Dorothy whispered, "but I took it too far. I was so worried about making you strong that I forgot to show you that I cared." Michael reached across and took her hand. "But you did show me, Mrs. Whitfield. Not with words, but with actions. You stayed after school to help me with reading. You gave me extra assignments to build my confidence. You pushed me to rewrite essays until they were perfect." Dorothy remembered those after-school sessions. How Michael would sit at the desk in the front row, working through difficult passages with determination that amazed her. "I thought you hated those extra sessions," she said. "I did hate them at the time," Michael admitted with a small smile. "But they taught me something more valuable than reading skills. They taught me that improvement comes from doing things that are uncomfortable. That growth happens when someone cares enough to push you beyond what you think you can do." Michael stood up and walked to the blackboard where Dorothy had written thousands of lessons over the years. Do you know what my greatest fear was in high school? He asked. Failing, Dorothy guessed. No, my greatest fear was disappointing you. Even when I thought you didn't believe in me, I still wanted to prove that I was worth your time and attention. Dorothy felt a fresh wave of emotion wash over her. Michael, you never disappointed me. Not once. Even when I was being hard on you. I was so proud of your effort. I wish I had known that then, Michael said. But maybe it's better that I didn't. Maybe the uncertainty made me work harder. Michael picked up his old essay from the desk and read a few lines silently. You know what's funny? He said. I accomplished every goal I wrote about in this essay. Professional basketball player, NBA championships, making my family proud. But there was one thing I wanted that I never wrote down. What was that? Dorothy asked. I wanted you to be proud of me too. I wanted the teacher who challenged me the most to finally say that I had done well. Dorothy stood up slowly, her arthritis making movement difficult. She walked over to Michael and looked him directly in the eyes. Michael Jeffrey Jordan, she said, using his full name just like his mother used to do. I have been proud of you every single day for 45 years. You became everything I hoped you could be and more than I ever dared to imagine. Michael felt his eyes filling with tears again. Really, you became the greatest basketball player who ever lived. But more importantly, you became a man of character. You worked hard, you treated people with respect, and you never forgot where you came from. That's what I'm most proud of. Michael hugged Dorothy again, and this time both of them were smiling through their tears. Mrs. Whitfield, he said, I have a confession to make. The real reason I wanted to meet with you today wasn't to confront you about the past. It was to thank you. Dorothy pulled back and looked at him in surprise. Thank me? Yes, because I finally understood something a few years ago. Every championship I won, every record I broke, every moment of success, it all started in this classroom. With a teacher who cared enough to make me work harder than I wanted to. Michael folded up both letters and handed them back to their writers. These letters don't matter anymore, he said. The hurt is gone. The misunderstanding is over. What matters is that we both know the truth now. As they prepared to leave room 142 for the final time together, Dorothy turned back to look at the classroom one more time. Michael, she said, what would you tell a young teacher who has a student with big dreams? How should they handle it? Michael thought for a moment. I'd tell them to believe in the dream, but prepare the dreamer for the work. Be tough when you need to be, but make sure the student knows you care. And never, ever give up on them, even when they want to give up on themselves. Dorothy smiled. That's exactly what I was trying to do. I just wish I had been better at showing the caring part. You showed it, Michael said. It just took me 45 years to understand how. As they walked out of Laney High School together, the sun was setting over Wilmington. The parking lot was empty now except for their 2 cars. But somehow, the school felt fuller than it had in years. Mrs. Whitfield, Michael said as they reached their cars. Would you like to have dinner sometime? I'd love to hear more stories. About your teaching career. Dorothy's face lit up. I would like that very much. Good, because I think we have about 45 years of conversations to catch up on. As Dorothy drove home that evening, she felt lighter than she had in decades. The secret she had carried for so long was finally out. The guilt that had haunted her was finally gone. And most importantly, she finally knew that her toughest student had become her greatest success, not in spite of her methods, but because of them. The teacher who had tried to crush Michael Jordan's dreams had actually helped him build the strength to make them all come true. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the hardest lessons. And sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who challenge us the hardest. Michael Jordan and Dorothy Whitfield had both learned that truth, and it had set them both free. We'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and tell us your city or country. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. We share real tales of courage, determination, and the power of never giving up on your dreams. Most importantly, please share this video with your friends and family. Stories like these remind us that kindness, understanding, and second chances can change everything. Let's spread this message of hope and show the world that it's never too late to heal old wounds and find the truth that sets us free. Thank you for listening. And remember, your dreams are never too big, and it's never too late to understand someone's heart. Until next time, keep believing in yourself.